Good morning, everyone. I am Heather Herring, the Education Manager of NRRA, and I want to warmly welcome you to the first official session of our summer webinar series. It is the first week of summer. This morning, we will hear about recycling market updates. Next slide, please. Do you need professional credits? You will receive 1 hour of credit for New Hampshire operators from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services for viewing this webinar. This webinar is being recorded. Please complete the survey at the end of the webinar, and you can continue to learn with NRRA, and feel free to visit our website at nrra.net. As of tomorrow, we will be opening a new website. It'll be nrrarecycles.org. For our recycling facility operators, if you could go back 2 slides, please. Thank you.
The next one.
One more slide. Yep. For our recycling facility operators, we have 10 webinars to offer this summer. To choose from and learn. You can register online. And then next slide, please. For our educators, administrators, and community members, we have 11 webinars to share. And although I listed these on 2 different slides, all webinars are open to all. I just wanted to set the table for GoToWebinar. You will not be able to be heard by the presenters or other participants on GoToWebinar. If you cannot hear the presenters, click on the arrow next to the audio and computer audio and choose computer audio. If that does not work, try clicking on the phone, using the phone audio. We hope you ask questions and the presenters will answer them if time allows. Click on questions and keep your questions short, please. Next slide, please. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Northeast Resource Recovery Association. We are a recycling nonprofit. We have over 400 members that are primarily municipalities, and we were founded nearly 40 years ago. Next slide, please. What do? We offer cooperative marketing and purchasing services. We're able to enable communities to manage their own recycling programs. We have over 40 programs, including single stream and municipal solid waste. And we connect sellers of recyclables to purchasers. Next slide, please. We also offer education and technical assistance. We have workshops, facility tours, an annual conference on normal years, and technical assistance, lots of questions, as well as a school club with lots of programs. Next slide, please. And now I wish to introduce Chaz Miller, who is the ex officio member of the Northeast Recycling Council Board of Directors and primary author of the NERC reports on increasing North American domestic recycled paper and recycled plastic industry. He's currently the chair of the Montgomery County, Maryland Aiming for Zero Waste Task Force. Now I hand the presentation over to Chaz. Welcome.
Thank you, Heather, and welcome to everybody on the webinar. The slides will be available, I believe, online and also from me by email. My email address will be at the end. So don't try to take copious notes. You will be able to get my speaking notes as part of the slide package. So now I've been talking about recycling markets at conferences in the United States for over 4 decades. I've talked about markets that were collapsing. I've talked about markets that were soaring. And I've talked about markets that were just kind of static. Maybe you could just call those boring. This is the most unusual market I have seen. If you look at the 2020 recycling market forecasts, including the one that I wrote for Waste 360 in December, none of us predicted the pandemic. I predicted something of a middling year with better prices for paper as the year progressed, and and plastic markets remaining kind of challenging. Yet by mid-March of this year, the unexpected happened. All 50 states and 6 territories were under a state of emergency by March 16th. Within 3 weeks after that, 40 states and 3 territories had declared stay-at-home orders. Along with the rest of the world, our economy took a major hit. Schools, offices, and businesses closed. Now in late June, most of the stay-at-home orders have been modified or dropped, but many businesses and offices remain closed. We have record-setting unemployment rates, 22 million Americans receiving unemployment benefits at the end of May, triple the number during the Great Recession. 1.5 million applications were filed last week. What that does, that leads to, because of these economic changes, it leads to changes in how we spend our money and what we buy, and that's important because that reflects what you're going to collect for recycling and for disposal. Consumer spending peaked on March the 11th. Retail sales were down 14.7% in April. They came up 13% in May, but we still seen some amazing changes in spending. Grocery buying spiked, then it went sort of back to normal. But home delivery of groceries was up 400%. Home meal delivery was up 50%. Apparel sales, clothing, took an enormous hit. They were down 46%, except for face masks, which have done quite well. Office supplies are up 6%, and that's because of home offices. And restaurant and travel changes, we all know they just pretty much tanked. Now, there have been other changes. I'm sure everybody's heard about the jump in residential waste and recycling and the decline in commercial waste and recycling. But the reality is there's less waste and recyclables overall for the very simple reason that businesses and institutions such as schools generate more than households do overall. Although on the other hand, let's face it, many of us have cleaner closets. There's definitely increased safety awareness and precautions for industry employees. And we've seen a small number of recycling programs and curbside drop-off programs either suspended or canceled. You know, I could cite more changes, but we know the pandemic has been extremely disruptive. So this is what I'll be talking about: how supplies of recyclables have changed, how recycling markets are reacting to these changes. I will discuss current prices, and I will make some predictions about what could happen going forward. But first, we have to accept the fact we are in the fog of the pandemic. We don't know now, maybe not even next month, how the pandemic will play out and how long it will last. You know, our most recent experience as a country with the pandemic was a century ago with the Spanish flu. Now, I have some thoughts about markets. I hope you find them useful. I absolutely invite your questions and your feedback in the presentations. So let's get started with what has not changed. Well, what are recyclables have not changed at all? They are simply raw materials looking for buyers. And the pandemic did not change the fact that these raw materials are still commodities. Commodities whose prices fluctuate. There are commodities that are bought, not sold, and those buyers continue to have the same needs. They want reliable quantity, they want reliable quality at an acceptable price, and never underestimate the impact of quality. Buyers want your raw materials, not your garbage. What has changed? Well, suppliers have changed and buyers have changed. Well, let's start with some of those supply side changes. Well, we already noted there's less waste and recyclables from businesses because, let's face it, closed businesses and schools don't generate anything. That means there's less sorted office paper from offices. That means there's fewer boxes from retailers. Now, grocery stores still continue to generate high quality OCC, but the increase, even with the increase in residential recycling of corrugated boxes, we've lost corrugated boxes because groceries, you know, all the closed retail stores, residential just can't make up the gap from all those closed retail stores. That's one of the reasons prices have gone up. because the supply is smaller now than the demand. And you got to keep in mind one other thing. Residential OCC is not as clean as commercial OCC, and curbside contamination has not gone down. There's also some interesting changes in container supplies. Because of container deposit redemption suspensions, 9 of 10 container deposit states suspended redemption. Connecticut was the first to begin to resume, and now all but Iowa have resumed, and Iowa actually starts up tomorrow. But what happened is the pandemic highlighted the reliance of PET, glass, and aluminum end markets on deposit containers. They're reliable in quantity, and they're absolutely reliable in quality, just what markets want. And one of the interesting side effects of that, we have seen the imports of used beverage containers go up 16% in the first 4 months of 2020, and primarily that was March and April. We will see hoarded containers coming back as deposit opens reopen, but I think it's fair to say that some has just been lost due to lack of space or lack of interest. Although interestingly, the Ripple Glass recycling program in the Kansas City area has seen a 22% increase in glass at its drop-off centers, and that's a non-deposit area. I think the good people in Kansas City are drinking a bit more beer. So let's look at some other changes on the supply side. The pandemic has hastened the evolving time. Several years ago, I keynoted NRRA conference when we were able to meet together in Manchester. I was speaking about the changes in materials and products that we use on a daily basis. Now we have less paper, less glass, and more plastics. That's been going on for the last 2 decades. We also have more pallets, and we have more food waste. Also, that's been going on the last 2 decades, and actually even more yard waste. But we've seen, because of the pandemic, some additional changes in that evolving time. And we need to look particularly at paper. Paper is incredibly important to recycling programs. It's at the heart of both residential and commercial collection. It supplies the tonnage, and when times are good, it supplies the revenue. Businesses supply about 2/3 of the paper that's collected for recycling in our country. That's mostly OCC from retailers, but also businesses are a key supplier of sorted office paper. For residential curbside programs, and I suspect drop-off programs, paper is 50 to 60% of what is collected. And as Waste Management's Susan Robinson noted in a recent webinar for Waste 360, paper now supplies 70% of the revenue from curbside programs, which is a complete reversal from a year ago. Nonetheless, our overall use of paper and the kind of paper has changed dramatically over the last 2 decades. Paper use peaked 2 decades ago. Now it is down 20 million tons. And this little slide shows the difference in the paper we use. This is capacity to make paper in the United States over the last decade. The capacity to make printed paper dropped by 10%, from 44% to a little over 1/3, while the capacity to make container board, the raw materials of corrugated boxes, went from a little under 40% to close to 50%. We simply use less printed paper in our country, and that's where the 20 million drop came from. It came right out of printed paper. Box production actually remained very steady over the last 2 decades. It was able to hold ground even as a lot of manufacturing shifted overseas, and those overseas manufacturers did not need boxes made in this country. They were quite happy to take boxes made locally. As for tissue and towel production, which is pretty much the remainder of capacity, along with paper plates and other things, that production pretty much grew with the population. Besides that, no real changes. But the pandemic has, on its own, and as markets are dealing this, we're seeing additional changes. Less printed paper is being used because of the school and office closes. 20 paper making machines to make printing and writing paper are taking downtime in this quarter. 2 mills are closing because of this collapse in the demand for the end product. We do see more packaging paper because of e-commerce and home food delivery. In 2019, e-commerce was somewhere between 11 and 12% of retail sales. It had a larger than normal increase in the first quarter of 2020. It was up 0.5%. It's going to be fascinating to see the results for the second quarter when we see 3 months worth of pandemic-related changes to the kind of packaging we use and the amount of e-commerce and the amount of home food delivery. And you know, one of the results is the containerboard industry is operating gangbuster rates. They're doing very nicely at 90%. But their inventory is going up. We're already seeing a certain softening in demand for boxes. There's some big questions out there. When offices and schools reopen, will printed paper make a comeback? Can people continue to afford the extra cost of home grocery and a home food delivery, especially if unemployment remains stubbornly high? Will e-commerce sustain its growth? Those are some big questions that have yet to play out. The pandemic has also had changes in how we use plastic. Fiber is the biggest recycled PET market. Yet, as I noted earlier, clothing sales are down, so that fiber market is not good. Carpet sales, another key fiber market, they were actually in decline before the pandemic. As for beverage bottles, well, we saw a lot of panic buying of water bottles in March. Now the question is, when it comes to soft drinks and water, are we going to have the normal seasonal high we have in the summer, or is it going to be a little bit less because of social distance and other virus concerns? And there's also been an interesting impact on end markets for recycled plastics. KW Plastics, which is located down in Alabama and is the biggest plastic recycler in America, noted in a webinar a month and a half ago that their packaging sales are booming, but their sales to automotive markets have collapsed because of all the automobile factories being closed. And the difference was such that overall demand for their recycled pellets was down. And we've also seen a real pushback in favor of plastic bags lately with delays in plastic bag bans, et cetera. If you want to ask me a question at the end, I'll give you my rant on the lousy science behind the allegations against reusables, but we can save that for the question and answering period. Let's look a little bit more now on the buyer side. Are we going to have a continued decline of exports? Up till 2000, we did not export much paper or plastic recyclables. However, in the 90s, China was really building up its capacity to make paper and paperboard. Newly built mills, ultra modern, they had cheap labor, they had cheap shipping costs to get raw materials, recycled paper from America and Europe. So they overpaid for, frankly, lousy quality. By 2010, mixed plastic exports were on the rise. And Chinese import restrictions and bans really changes in 2017 with pretty much an immediate ban on mixed plastic and mixed paper imports into China. And exports of OCC have been declining steadily ever since. The pandemic has made exporting harder. U.S. ports are operating on reduced hours. There are short supplies of shipping containers, and there are higher shipping costs. Let's look at some data. In 2019, and this data comes from Resource Recovery Magazine, 2019, 18 million tons of recycled paper was exported. That's actually down 3 million tons from 2018. But it's worth noting that recycled paper export markets remain 36% of end markets for recycled paper. Now, 1/7 of our paper exports go to Mexico or to Canada. Not all of it goes overseas to Asia. And the big issue now is with China ban all recyclables. They have been issuing additional import licenses for OCC, 4.5 million tons worth of licenses for this year so far. I think we could see some additional buying by Chinese mills in anticipation of a final ban. They want to stock up on their raw material supplies. I am inclined to agree with people smarter than me, and I expect to see a ban at the end of the year. But it's worth noting that the way the ban is written, it actually refers to solid waste, not to recyclables. The ban, and that language was used earlier this year to allow an increase in metal scrap imports into China. So if the regime decides it wants it out, if it decides it needs our raw materials to make their paper boxes, they have that option. What about recycled plastic exports? And I think the first thing I want you to notice here, we do recycled plastics exports in pounds. We do paper in tons. Let's face it, 1.46 billion pounds, and it sounds a little bit bigger than 18 million tons. But those pounds are only 73,000 tons. So in terms of the amount of plastic we export, it's not that much. And it's down almost in half from 2017. Now, our exports remain a good chunk of end markets for recycled plastic. It's somewhere between 10 and 15% for 2019. I have not seen the latest data. I do know that Canada is the biggest importer. They get almost a quarter of the plastics we export. Mexico is number 5. And it's worth noting that PET and HDPE bottle exports have gone down steadily since 2010. Now it's less than 15% for PET and less than 10% for HDPE. And that's simply because our ability to use recycled content, PET and HDPE, has increased so much in this country since 2010. We simply did not need overseas markets. However, recycled plastic pellets are continuing to go to China. Now, as export markets have declined, domestic recycling market capacity has increased. This is a picture of the new Pratt recycling mill in Wapakoneta, Ohio. This mill opened in October of last year. It makes pizza boxes and similar kinds of paper packaging. It uses 180,000 tons per year of residential mixed paper and OCC, and about a 2-to-1 ratio between mixed paper and OCC. And it will double that capacity use within a decade. What this shows is that entrepreneurs are seeing opportunity. They're seeing a vast amount of available cheap raw material, and so they're going to take advantage of it. This is just history repeating itself from what happened in the extraordinary price collapse in 1990. So what has actually been announced? And the slide on recycled paper content expansion and recycled plastic content expansion comes from work that I've done through NERC, the Northeast Recycling Coalition Council, excuse me, NERC, sorry about that. As chairman of the Recycling Markets Task Force for NERC and NUMOA. We've seen 22 North American recycling capacities announced since 2017. Almost all of those use OCC. At least 7 use residential mixed paper as a major input. Now, 4 of those are going to be shipping recycled fiber pulp to China, and it's interesting to note that at least one other American paper company has said they are also selling recycled fiber pulp to Chinese mills. So what's the status of those new mills? Well, we're talking 3 million tons of announced new capacity. In OCC, 5 of the expansions have been completed. 2 more will be completed either this month, maybe next month. They're on the way. 1 new facility is opened, and it's in the process, just as the Pratt one is, of ramping up its production and its use. On the mixed paper side, the new facility for Pratt opened in October. The Green Bay plant and the Cascades plant, Green Bay is in Wisconsin, Cascades is in Virginia, will open in late 2020, and in the case of Cascades, in early 2021. But I want, and those are both big residential mixed paper users, and those are certainly going to help that market when they open. But I want to point out that not all new capacity will be open or will be built. There's too much production capacity. That's why they're operating at such a high rate for a start. And there's also rising raw material prices, which gets back to that comment that I mentioned earlier about what buyers want. They don't want to overpay. And I think virtually all the OCC expansions will be completed. There may be 1 or 2 way out that they weren't scheduled to open for a year or 2 that may not. But the new mills, some of the new mills won't be built. I think that's fairly clear. What about on the plastic side? 25 new processing facilities announced, and 9 are open. Most of them make resin or pellets that they then sell to end users. Some make end products, usually it's plastic lumber. As with the paper side, there's no guarantees that all these 25 new facilities will be built. They've got to deal with the issue of end market prices, which are far more severe on the plastic side than on the paper side. They have to deal with raw material supply and quality. It's much easier to get paper than it is to get plastic. And I think that supply issue could well be their biggest problem. We do know that deposits are a total guarantee of high quality and high quantity, but there's not a lot of momentum these days for an expansion in any container deposit laws. So let's talk prices. What are recyclables worth today? Now, I use pricing sheets, as does everybody. I think pricing sheets are very important. It's really sort of an independent way to test what the market is out there. None of them are perfect. There's issues of the time between when the data was collected and when it was made public. There's the questions of how often is the data collected? Is it collected monthly or weekly or what? But nonetheless, it tends to be very good, especially for trends. It gives you an idea of where markets are going and what you're likely to see from markets. Let's start off with prices for old corrugated papers and residential sorted and mixed paper. And I do use recyclingmarkets.net. Resource Recycling publishes this data every month, usually the second week, in their Resource Recycling online paper. The chart shows this year, since January, for OCC's sorted residential paper and residential mixed paper. The blue is the OCC. You see, it started at about 25, but it rose a bit in February and March. Then it picked up speed in April. It was up to about 73 in April, and then it nationally hit 107 in May. Then it slumped down a little bit nationally to about 75. Residential mixed paper, which is the gray line at the bottom, and sorted residential paper, which is essentially residential paper with the corrugated taken out. They were both pretty flat until April, and then they rose. The interesting thing, I think, is that those prices had maintained themselves even when the OCC price went down, which tells you that the spread between the price of OCC and sorted residential paper is great enough to justify pulling the OCC out, that separated paper. Now let's get depressed and let's look at the prices for metals. Aluminum cans, cents per pound, under 40 cents a pound in June, 56 cents in June of last year. Steel cans, even worse, less than half, a little over $80 a ton now as opposed to a year ago. It's very simple. There's too much global production capacity for metal cans. Too much capacity, chasing supply, way too much supply, prices will go down. And there's another kind of weird thing that's been going on, and that's the aluminum industry in this country cares more about automotive markets and less about packaging markets. So their focus is changing away a little bit. They're still happy to make cans, but they're more interested in those automotive markets. Now let's look at prices for recycled plastics. I almost kind of think now I should have up one of those signs about despair. And I showed this graph first for two reasons. One is it highlights, that line on top is HDPE natural. It highlights just how much better prices are for natural HDPE bottles than any of the other plastic resins. You see the other four glommed together in the bottom. PET is the best. Film A is below PET. And then you've got colored HDPE, and you've got polypropylene. But there's quite a gap between HDPE and natural HDPE and the other resins. And then we look more specifically at the prices, and these are cents per pound. PET beverage bottles, less than half now than where they were a year ago. Natural HDPE, yeah, they're up from what they were a year ago, but they're down from where they were at the beginning of the year. There's a bit of an anomaly at the end of last year and early this year, because most people think because of some new specs for drain pipe that would allow the use of recycled content, that would be natural HDPE. And you see the colored HDPE, the polypropylene, even film grade A, all down. Pretty depressing. It's very clear that energy prices have a major impact on recycled plastic prices. Come on, global fuel, petroleum, and liquid fuel consumption is down 5% in the first quarter of this year. I don't think it's to be up much in the second quarter, although there clearly is an uptick in people driving in this quarter as opposed to April, latter part of March of the first quarter. But you look at the price of Brent crude, which is the yardstick the petroleum industry uses, 29 a barrel in May. Last year, the average price was 64 a barrel. The predicted average price for 2020 is only 34 a barrel. And in 2021, only 48 a barrel. I mean, these are soft prices. Now, granted, I don't know any of us who really want to pay a lot more than we are now for gas. I get that. But the relationship is absolutely, you can't deny it. So what is next? I don't know. No, if I knew, I'd tell you. But there's so much uncertainty out there. There's so little that we know about how recycling markets react in a global pandemic to the extent that we are seeing worldwide. Uncertainty is clearly the name of the game. When will a vaccine be developed? When will jobs come back? When will the economy revive? And when it does, well, at first people thought it would be a V-shape, a quick collapse, a quick rise. Then they decided it would be a U, a quick collapse, flat, and then a quick rise. Now, the economic consensus is beginning to be that it's a swoosh-shaped recovery, as in the Nike logo. And that's exactly what the recovery was during the Great Recession. We hit bottom at the end of 2009. We slowly recovered and returned to 2008 GDP level in mid-2011. And there's some indications that might be what we're going through now. It's worth noting on first quarter earnings calls, almost half of the S&P 500 suspended their previous estimates for the year. They just said, we don't know what our revenues and our costs will be for the rest of the year, so we're suspending our guidance. Warren Buffett, the well-known investor, CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, at the annual meeting in May 2nd simply said, I don't believe anybody knows that what the market is going to do tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. And if that's what Warren Buffett says, who am I to contradict him? But I know you all want some predictions. So here's some thoughts on the supply side first. Residential waste and recycling generation will decline. It's absolutely inevitable. We will see over the next year the utter relationship between consumer spending and waste generation and recycling generation. I really hate to say it, but if you want to have people consume less, a pandemic is right what you asked for. Because with this level of unemployment, with this uncertainty, it just weighs on the consumer economy. Credit paper will continue to decline. It's going to continue to decline because we still don't know how many schools are reopened. We don't know about colleges. We don't know how much working from home will increase. To what extent will people return to offices and how quickly? We are social animals. Now, intriguingly, there's a little bit of evidence now that's out of Georgia where they reopened all their offices and they've seen office capacity go up to about 72% of what it was in February. So there has definitely been a return, but it's not 100%. Governing Magazine did an article a month ago on what state and local governments are learning about jobs that are easy to do at home versus jobs that are hard to do at home. And it's key. It's linked in my speaker notes. It's a fascinating read. And will Americans learn to recycle right? You know, we may tell pollsters we want to recycle. We may tell pollsters we want to buy recycled, but the contamination in our carts utterly betrays us. On the demand side, paper prices are likely to decline. Reese's Hannah Jow predict a decline in demand for recovered fiber if the economy weakens in the third quarter. In addition, newly reopened businesses in schools and offices, they'll increase the supply of recycled paper. And that may well lead to more supply chasing less demand. And then there's China hanging out there where they continue to import OCC. Long term, I think paper markets might be good. Short term, I think they're going to be very turbulent as all these changes play out. On the plastic side, plastic markets just face challenging conditions. Virgin resin capacity and recycled content resin capacity are both scheduled to expand. The good news, I suppose, is we are seeing the virgin resin new projects are being canceled. The industry doesn't see the need for the plastic. That could actually help some pricing for recycled content. Although I think, frankly, some of the recycling content expansions will also have to be canceled. You know, oil is going to remain inexpensive. Some big questions out there. Will brands honor their commitments to purchase recycled content? If the brands live up to those commitments, that will help buoy markets for recycled plastics. If the brands walk away from their commitments, shame on them, because that is not going to help those markets. And there's the issue of minimum content requirements at the state or the federal level and their potential impact on markets. Now, I'm supposed to end, I'm told, as a presenter, on a happy note. So, it's about as happy as I can get, folks. But I do think, intriguingly, we have an interesting opportunity here. With the uncertainty about our economy and the persistence of contamination in our recycling bins, I think we have the perfect opportunity to rethink what we are trying to achieve from recycling. Do we want to recycle everything? Or maybe we should be more focused and just concentrate on the major things in the waste stream, the things that we can successfully concentrate on and recycle. Maybe we should have more realistic goals than what we have now. And why do we recycle? Do we recycle for more raw materials, or do we recycle for less greenhouse gas emissions? You cannot have both. Now, as I noted in the beginning, in my 4 decades in recycling, I have never seen this kind of extreme market disruption. But I note 2 things, and this has been so consistent in these same 4 decades. The political support for recycling remains strong. Americans do love to recycle. Now, this is going to be tested in the next budget cycles at the local government level, especially for all you local governments who are on January to December budget cycles instead of July to June. This will be tested then, and we'll see how strong that political support remains. But there's another thing, and this especially reflects upon people in the recycling industry. By nature, if you're going to be a recycler, you've got to be resilient. You've got to, you know, markets are going to collapse on you. You have to be optimistic by nature. I do think better markets will return. They have in the past. That is the one guarantee we have from history. Better markets will return. I just wish I could tell you when that would happen. Now, this is my contact information. Feel free to email me. Feel free to give me a call. Happy to answer your questions there. I'm also very happy to answer your questions now. This is my last slide that I have on my deck is a lot of the basic sources I use, they're very good sources on markets. The study from NERC, both studies from NERC, Moore and Associates, Bill Moore, Hannah Zhao at RISI, for plastic recycling, Moore Recycling, Anita Butler, they're all excellent sources of information. Ken McEntee at Paper Stock Report, papermarkets.net, and of course, Resource Recycling Magazine and its weekly e-news. They're all excellent sources of data and information. So what I'd like to do now is ask for questions. And I've got a couple of questions here. There's a question, what is SOP? Excellent question. I do use jargon a little bit too much. I apologize for that. It's sorted office paper. It's in particular what you get out of office buildings in their paper recycling programs. When I worked in an office building and I'd put my paper in a bin, that would be collected separately. Clean graded paper, it always commands excellent prices as a raw material, as opposed to your sorted residential paper, which is a much more mixed grade of paper with a lot just different kinds of paper in it than your basic office grades. Next question I see is explain why natural HDP has dramatically higher pricing than other plastics. Well, it's all about value primarily. It's about some unique end markets. Nobody really understood why prices took off for natural HDPE. I think it was in October of last year. There were sort of two reasons given. One was a new specification for pipe, for drainage pipe, for which natural HDPE would now be allowed. Recycled content was essentially given a super thumbs up in the new spec. I believe it came out of ASTM. That was believed to have caused a price boost. And the other was there was some speculation that some buyers were hoarding HDPE. And it's just that those markets, because of the value of their end product, they're able to pay more. And you sort of see this in the PET end markets. The fiber markets for PET can pay more than the bottle markets or the strapping markets or the other markets for PET, recycled PET containers, because their value is higher. The value of carpet, the value in clothing and that fleece clothing, it's just higher on a per unit basis than an individual soft drink bottle or an individual water bottle. Just better markets, longer life, just better markets. So that's why you see that price discrimination there. And I think there are more questions, but I am not sure how to, okay. Now I know how to do it. Let me get to the start here. Okay, there's a question about suggested changes or additions in source separation that would bring in revenue or reduce waste at municipalities. I think just get people to do corrugated separately. Keep that corrugated as clean as possible. Corrugated markets want clean corrugated. They will pay for clean corrugated. So I would definitely do everything you can to just have people put corrugated boxes in have separate boxes for corrugated and concentrate on those. Will disruption in container supply from redemption pauses hurt efforts long-term to promote recycled content rather than using virgin materials? I don't think so. The disruption appears to be over. As I said earlier, Iowa is the last holdout state, if you will. It goes back tomorrow. Not all the states are back to full redemption. The only thing that worries me is what people hoarded. And there does appear to be some extensive hoarding versus what just got thrown away because people didn't have storage spaces. I mean, you live in an apartment in New York City, you only have so much storage spaces for those containers. I don't know how that's going to play out, but now that they're back, I don't think that's going to be a problem. What could we expect to see if China's potential ban does include all recyclables? which would be really OCC, because that's they import OCC. They still import, I believe, clean newsprint, and they may still import some specialty grades. There'll be more supply available in this country. It'll depress prices a bit. We're not as dependent on overseas market as the Europeans are. The markets, the Europeans just, you know, their paper industry declined far dramatically, far more. It never was as big as the American, and it's declined more. They're far more dependent on overseas markets. They're going to be the ones who are going to be hurt more. But then again, in a global economy, one country's glut could well be everybody. So I think that if the Chinese totally ban, that will be a problem. And we'll wait and see if they do. That has yet to play out, because it's very clear that there are insufficient supplies of recyclable paper domestically in China. It's for two reasons, one of which they're already highly efficient at getting paper out of their waste stream. I had the good fortune to be in Shanghai a couple of years ago, and you would see the guys on bicycles with those big stacks of flattened corrugated boxes behind them on a rack on the bicycle, common sight. Yet those are the boxes that stayed in China. They have no access except through America and Europe, and all the boxes that were shipped out of China containing products made in China. That's why they rely so much on imports. And I think it's going to be interesting to see as those mills run into problems with raw materials. But again, people much smarter than I am are very adamant that that the Chinese will enforce the ban at the end of the year. So we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. Got a question. I mentioned that fibers are the largest end market for #1 for PET. Fibers are about 38% of the recycled, the end markets for PET. Food and beverage containers together are about 20%. Exports, I think, are 10 or 12. They may be a little bit higher. And then you get into some much more unique markets, strapping, things like that, as they play out. I've got a question about what is RMP? That's just residential mixed paper. That's the mixed paper that I put out at the curbside in my bin. And in my case, in Montgomery County, Maryland, we have dual stream. So that would be everything together. That would be the corrugated boxes. That would be the newspapers. And, you know, this is an area where you get home delivery of the Washington Post. So we are a newspaper-rich area. And it would include, of course, mixed paper, you know, just all the other stuff in mixed paper. Do we have any other questions? Be happy to answer any if we have any more. That's the last one that I see.
That's all I have right now, Chaz. Well, thank you so much for this informative presentation. As a person who helped move material, it was, you know, have our heads down, moving load by load for towns and helping them out. It was just great to hear your big picture presentation and all, you know, some potential predictions, things about capacity and exports, the evolving ton, and yeah, just really some new perspectives. Thank you to our sponsors, USDA, Interstate Refrigerant Recovery Incorporated, and Schnitzer. And I wanted to let everyone know that reminder to please take the survey after it will immediately launch after this webinar, and it'll also appear in your email. We welcome any feedback. And then on Friday, we have, to continue our summer webinar series, optimizing our recycling education and outreach efforts. Aaron Victor from Mass DEP will be presenting, really, you know, focusing with educators and administrators, and really look forward to seeing folks there on Friday, noon to 1. So our schedule is Wednesdays 9 to 10 and Fridays noon to 1. Many of our webinars on Wednesdays are focused towards operators, and our Friday noon presentations are more towards educators, administrators, and community members. But this was fantastic. Thank you again, Chaz. And we hope that you register for more webinars throughout the summer and join us. Share this on social media. And thank you, everyone, for joining us, and happy summer from NRRA.
Thank you.